Welcome back to AI Paper Podcasts. This is where we, cut through the jargon and get straight to the core insights from the latest AI research.
That's right.
Today we're diving into a really interesting one. Benchmarking large vision language models on fine-grained image tasks. A comprehensive evaluation. And the big takeaway, these powerful LVLMs, the ones that seem to understand images and chat about them, well, they actually kind of stumble when it comes to spotting really subtle details.
Yeah, it's a surprising blind spot. This paper introduces a new benchmark specifically designed to test that weakness. It's packed with stuff our audience, AI researchers, ML engineers, really needs to know.
Exactly. The works from Hongtao Yu, Xishen Wei, Yuxin Peng, and Serge Belongi, researchers from Southeast University, Peking University, and the University of Copenhagen. They're asking a fundamental question. How well do these models really see the fine print, visually speaking? So that's our mission for this session. We're going deep into this paper to figure out how good LVLMs are at telling apart tiny visual differences. And they didn't just guess, they built FG-BMK.
Which is a huge new benchmark. We're talking over 1 million questions, hundreds of thousands of images.
All aimed at putting these models under a microscope for visual nuance.
Right. And for anyone needing the super quick version, here it is. LVLMs are great generally, but struggle with fine-grained details. The new FG-BMK benchmark shows exactly where.
Okay.
Contrastive training helps them tell things apart better, but aligning vision and text too closely can sometimes hurt that detail perception.
Interesting.
They're also more sensitive to small image changes in these tasks. They get the overall appearance, maybe, but not the fine category differences.
Got it.
And maybe unsurprisingly, models specifically built for fine-grained tasks, they still beat the general LVLMs.
Okay, that's the snapshot. Let's unpack it. Why focus so much on these fine-grained tasks? Why should engineers care?
Well, think about real-world uses. It's often the tiny details that matter, right? Biodiversity monitoring, you need to tell apart very similar species, not just bird or plant.
Right, like identifying a specific, maybe endangered butterfly wing pattern.
Exactly. Or e-commerce. You're searching for a specific model year of a car or a particular fabric pattern. Those are fine-grained distinctions. Even robotics. A robot needs to grasp this specific screw, not just any screw.
Makes sense.
So while an LVLM might confidently say it's a flower, it could totally miss if it's that rare orchid you're looking for. This paper really shines a light on this gap great at the big picture, but this fundamental detailed analysis, it's been kind of overlooked.
Okay, so it's about moving beyond just broad categorization. Tell us more about this FG-BMK benchmark they built. What makes it different?
Well, first, the scale is impressive, over 1 million questions, 0.33 million images. But the clever part is the two evaluation approaches.
Two approaches.
Yeah. First is human-oriented. Think of it like having a chat with the AI about the image details. It uses true-false, multiple choice, short answer questions, really trying to gauge if the model understands the nuances like a person would.
So less about just getting the label right, more about conversational understanding of details.
Precisely. They ask about specific attributes, size, color, shape, like is this bird's beak curved or straight? What shade of blue is that flower petal? They also look at knowledge bias. Does the model just happen to know more about, say, dogs than specific types of aircraft because of its training data? And hierarchical granularity. Can it recognize something as a vehicle, then a car, then a sedan, then a specific make and model, testing different levels?
That's quite comprehensive for the understanding part. What's the second approach?
That's the machine-oriented evaluation. This looks more directly at the quality of the visual features the model learns. How good is it at representing fine-grained differences internally?
How do they measure that?
Standard computer vision metrics. Image retrieval. How well can it find similar images? Measured using mean average precision, MAP, and image classification, how accurately can it assign the correct fine-grained label? Measured by top 1 accuracy. They follow the DynoV2 evaluation framework here, which is pretty well respected.
Okay, and the images themselves, you mentioned they needed specific ones. Where did they come from?
Yeah, you can't just scrape the web for that reliably. They used images from 12 established, high-quality, fine-grained datasets. Think CUB200 2011 for birds, Stanford dogs, FGVC aircraft.
The classics.
Exactly. Also cars, flowers, food types. A good mix to ensure the benchmark covers a wide range of subtle visual challenges using data the research community trusts.
All right, so a robust benchmark. Let's get into the results. Starting with that human-like conversation part. What did they find? Did the LVLMs chat about details effectively?
Well, one of the clearest findings was the struggle with excessive granularity. Basically, the more similar the categories were, the worse the models performed.
How much worse?
Significantly. Using intern VL3 on the bird dataset, for example, accuracy on true-false and multiple choice questions dropped quite a bit when moving from identifying the general class, bird, to the genus, and even more when distinguishing the specific species.
So they're okay with bird, iffy on warbler, and lost on Tennessee warbler versus orange-crowned warbler.
Something like that, yeah. They see the forest, maybe even the type of tree, but distinguishing between very similar leaves. That's where they falter. It's like the fine details get blurred.
Interesting. And what about that knowledge bias you mentioned? Did they find models were better at some specific things than others?
They did. Accuracy was really inconsistent across different fine-grained categories. A LVLM, for instance, might nail one type of flower but be completely off on another.
And they thought this was because of the training data.
That was the hypothesis, that these models just haven't seen enough examples of certain fine-grained categories, or the examples are unbalanced, so they tested it. They fine-tuned LVLM, but specifically using balanced datasets where each category had similar representation. And guess what?
Performance evened out.
Exactly. Recognition became much more consistent across categories. It strongly suggests the bias isn't necessarily that some things are inherently harder to see, but that the model's knowledge base, derived from often unbalanced web-scale data, is patchy for these niche categories.
So the underlying visual system might be capable, but the language model part lacks the specific knowledge.
That seems to be a big part of it. They even noted many of these fine-grained categories are barely represented in the original massive pre-training datasets.
Makes sense. What about recognizing basic visual attributes, like color, shape, pattern? You'd think those would be easier.
You would, wouldn't you? But it's mixed. They found LVLMs were comparatively better at things like pattern, size, maybe length, but specific shapes and subtle color differences, still challenging.
So like telling stripes from spots might be okay, but distinguishing a specific curve or shade of red is harder.
Yeah, something like that. Intern VL3, for example, did better on pattern recognition than shape recognition. There's progress. Newer models seem better at pattern and length, but color and shape recognition are lagging behind. And it varies between models too.
Not a uniform weakness then. And the big comparison. How did these generalist LVLMs stack up against models built specifically for fine-grained tasks?
No contest, really. Even after fine-tuning the LVLMs, the specialized fine-grained models consistently performed better on their specific domains: birds, dogs, cars, you name it.
So specialization still wins for these really detailed jobs.
It seems so. The paper suggests LVLMs are optimized for breadth, for general tasks, and that optimization might inherently trade off some of that ultra-fine-grained discrimination ability.
Okay, that covers the human-oriented tests. Let's shift to the machine-oriented ones, the raw feature representation. What did those reveal about how these models process fine details internally?
A really clear signal was the benefit of contrastive training.
Contrastive training. Remind us quickly.
That's where the model learns by comparing things, pulling similar image-text pairs together in its internal representation and pushing dissimilar ones apart. Models trained this way, like EVA Clip, Intern VL, DynoV2, they showed significantly better performance in both retrieving fine-grained images and classifying them accurately compared to models using other approaches like generative QIN or reconstruction-based BEIT3.
So explicitly training the model to see differences helps it actually see the differences better for these tasks.
Pretty much. Statistical tests confirmed these weren't just random variations. Contrastive methods were genuinely better suited for fine-grained discrimination here.
What about just making the models bigger or feeding them more web data? Did that help crack the fine-grained problem?
Surprisingly, not really, or at least not automatically. They found that just increasing the size of the vision part of the model, or training on absolutely massive web data sets, didn't guarantee better fine-grained results. Well, DynoV2B, with a smaller vision encoder, actually beat BAT3L, which is larger. And comparing EVA Clip, trained on billions of web images, with DynoV2, trained on smaller curated data, didn't show a clear bigger is better trend for fine-grained tasks.
So quality over quantity for the training data seems crucial here.
It really points that way, and the learning method, like contrastive learning, seems more impactful than just raw scale for this specific challenge.
Right. Now, this next one was intriguing, the idea that aligning visual and text features could sometimes hurt performance. How does that work?
Yeah, that sounds counterintuitive, right? But the key is the granularity of the text. If you force the model's visual understanding to align very closely with text descriptions that are themselves quite general or coarse.
Like aligning a detailed image of a specific bird species with just the word bird.
Exactly. Doing that can actually reduce the model's ability to discriminate those fine visual details it initially perceived. They saw this with Olivet. Its classification accuracy dropped after alignment with text that wasn't specific enough.
But if the text was detailed,
then performance improved. It really underscores that for fine-grained tasks, the alignment needs to happen with equally fine-grained language. The level of detail needs to match. Otherwise, you risk washing out the visual specifics.
fascinating. Consistency and granularity is key. Okay, last key finding from the machine side. Robustness. How easily are these models thrown off by small changes?
They seem quite sensitive, actually, especially on these fine-grained tasks. The study showed LVLMs are more vulnerable to small perturbations, tiny alterations in the image features compared to how they handle general tasks.
More fragile when looking closely.
You could say that. Models like EVA Clip and Dana V2 had a much bigger accuracy drop on the detailed bird dataset when features were slightly tweaked, compared to the drop on a general dataset like CFAR 100.
And how does that compare to, say, a standard vision model?
They compared it to a vision transformer trained just on ImageNet, and that model was more robust to these small changes. The paper speculates this vulnerability in LVLMs might stem from their training on vast, potentially noisy, and often coarse-grained web data.
Like they haven't learned to ignore minor imperfections when focusing on subtle differences.
Perhaps. It's like they're easily distracted by tiny variations when the task demands focusing on very specific, subtle patterns. Definitely something to consider for real-world deployment where visual noise is common.
Absolutely. Okay, let's tie this all together. What's the main message for our audience, the researchers and engineers, actually building and using these models?
I think the core takeaway is LVLMs are powerful, no doubt, but don't assume they automatically handle fine visual details well. There's still a significant gap there, and this FG-BMK benchmark is a really valuable tool the community now has to measure progress and diagnose problems in this specific, crucial area.
And the paper points the way forward. What kind of future work do they suggest?
They highlight a few key directions. We need better training methods focused specifically on enhancing fine-grained understanding. We need to improve robustness, making models less sensitive to those small perturbations. And we need better ways for these models to actually reason about fine-grained categories, not just recognize patterns.
They did acknowledge FG-BMK isn't the be-all and end-all, right?
Yeah.
Mentioning things like medical images or satellite data might need different approaches.
Yeah, they're clear. It might not cover every niche fine-grained scenario, but they position it as a solid, practical benchmark for the majority of common use cases right now. It's a big step.
Definitely. So a final thought for everyone watching. Considering these findings, the struggles with granularity, the data bias issues, the sensitivity interviews, what new training approaches or even model architectures do you think could push LVLMs to finally grasp these fine visual details? And how do these limitations affect the AI projects you're working on right now? The paper, the code, the benchmark, it's all open source, worth exploring.
Definitely check it out.
Thanks for tuning in to AI Paper Podcast. We'll see you next time.